What's going on, everybody? Zach Rosenblatt back here with Mike K for the latest episode of the No Huddle Show. We haven't done as many recently because it hasn't been as newsy of a stretch for the Eagles after that initial wave of free agency. But the NFL draft is coming up. There's still a lot of rumors to discuss. There's some news today. But generally, Mike, how you doing as we're entering day 1,000 of the quarantine?
Well, I'm running daddy daycare at the house along with doing the full time beat coverage, which has been a very interesting experience. My kid really doesn't like when I sit at the table, and that's where I would do my work. So,
Oh, like he doesn't like when you're sitting at the table doing work, you're saying?
just in general, he doesn't like.
Oh, okay.
There's a lot of whining. He just recently started walking, and he's got
wow.
a lot of confidence as a walker. So, he's been walking around, but he's also been running into things and he's
just like his dad.
Yeah, it's true. He's tall, so he's continuing the K tradition of banging his head on things, which is very. It hasn't been.
He's definitely taken after his dad. That's for sure.
Yeah, it hasn't been great. So that's been a little rough, and it's kind of hard to. I did a story on how the coronavirus is impacting, the training for the draft, the communication in the draft, and my kid was just screaming throughout half of them. Luckily,
he's trying to distract you, so you're ready for all situations. It's good training, I think.
Well, it's weird because I think he's so used to me talking out loud so frequently from proofreading or doing whatever that he's just kind of he thinks we're having a conversation, and so when I'm on speaker with a position coach, he's like blah 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 blah. It's been interesting. How about you? How are you hanging in there?
I'm doing all right. I've let my beard just grow because it's not like I have to see anybody ever. So it's getting pretty large. You haven't seen me in a long time, actually. If you probably since the combine, I guess, right?
So you got a Mike Tanier beard? Is that what you're trying to say?
Yeah. I mean, I've still you still got to put the stuff in it, the conditioner and the beard oil and all that stuff. But I haven't trimmed it at all, so it's really messy, and I kind of look like Tom Hanks in Castaway right now. But I mean, it's not. This isn't easy, but I will say that we'd be working from home right now anyway. We're more fortunate than a lot of people, especially in our business. I mean, it's not ideal. I haven't really seen my family in a few weeks at this point because I live alone, so that part's not that fun. But we're trying to keep busy, and the NFL offseason has given us something to distract not just us but all of our readers and listeners with. Once the NFL draft comes and goes, then maybe we start panicking about whether the season's going to happen. But because there's a lot of, I mean, I'm sure since this podcast, everybody saw all the stuff about Donald Trump talking to all the commissioners and him acting like the season should start on time. I don't think that's actually based in anything necessarily, and I'm still skeptical about that, though. Knowing the NFL, I think they're going to do everything in their power to make it so the season starts, even if there's not fans in the stands. Where do you stand on the idea of this season starting on time?
I think there's a very, very good chance that we get empty stadium games. Now, That said, I don't see what the harm is in maybe pushing it back a month and doing the full season where you can, that's just where I stand. Maybe start it around when the NBA starts, or a little bit earlier. I don't know. I mean, I
think I saw Peter King say that the guy that does the schedule, I forget the guy's name. They think they're going to do contingencies for if it's a 14-game season and if it's a 12-game season also. And I think one of the main things I saw in there was that they'd probably do a road and a home game as the first two games. So if they need to delay it a little bit, you can just eliminate those two games, and they're non-division, I imagine, too. So I think that's something to keep an eye on because the schedule is still going to be announced in early May. Which I know there's some people that are up in arms about that. I don't really get that part of it because there's no harm in just saying a schedule. They can change it at any time. It's just an announcement of this is what we're planning to do in the fall. Like that, and I didn't understand the backlash to that part of it.
Well, I mean, maybe from a preparation standpoint,
yeah.
Or if you're a fan of, say, the Browns, and they travel to some place early on, and then that game gets canceled in week one, maybe you don't take that trip. I don't know.
I mean, I don't know if anybody should be planning a trip for the first week anyway.
Yeah, right. No, I just see. I think the solution is to cut the preseason down by 2 weeks this year, no matter what. move
Yeah.
back the season a month, and then you have 2 preseason games where maybe your starters play a series in each game, and then you have the scrubs play, after that, and then you go from there. I think the worst thing that can happen is starting this without fans in the stadium, because honestly, from a TV perspective, it's no secret I'm a huge wrestling fan.
Yeah.
And I've been watching a lot of wrestling without fans in the stands, and it has been just inconceivably boring. They put on WrestleMania the last 2 days, and while some of the stuff was really fun and interesting, it would have been so much better with a live crowd. And as somebody who is in live stadiums all the time and is just accustomed to that, it's a lot more interesting now. Would it make our jobs a lot easier to cover games from home? Absolutely. I probably wouldn't be up till 7 in the morning after every night game, but I mean, I just think from a fan base perspective and from a league optics perspective, I think being prudent in the waiting period is smart.
What I wonder is what I wonder is like how much training camp teams like need. Like, how many weeks of training camp do they need to have for before the season starts? Even if it means they eliminate the preseason, like because they can't just start the season without training camp. And I know like college football was like they need like the campuses open for like a month before they can even like consider starting a college football. That's different because it's students and you need the students to be on campus. Like if students can't be on campus, they're not going to have a college football season. But I'm curious like what the number is for training camp. Like how many days of practice do they need before they can start?
I'd imagine. I think it's normally like 28 days of training camp, so they need roughly a month, give or take, because of like breaks and stuff. I've talked to scouts, I've talked to people in the league. The real thing that's going to be impacted for the NFL is next year's draft. Like, there might not be a college football season.
Oh, yeah, that's a good point.
Scouts aren't on the road right now, and typically scouts start working.
Yeah, they're planning for next year already.
Probably, I mean, right? They've done the majority of their work for this year's draft. So this is going to be like uncharted territory, not just for this offseason, but next offseason. Of all the leagues that could survive this, the NFL is clearly leaps and bounds ahead of everybody else. I think the NHL is going to suffer mightily from this. I think MLB is going to suffer mightily from this. I think the NBA, given the benefit of starting around Halloween every year, is going to be fine. But I don't know what's going to happen as far as the draft this year, the NBA draft. I mean, you're obviously the NBA head of the two of us, but I mean, look, there are much worse things happening in the world than missing out on games and missing out on distractions. But this is going to reverberate for the next 12 to 18 months in all sports leagues. So I'm interested to see how it all plays out.
I mean, even just like the draft part of it, if you think like the NBA, the majority of the top prospects are usually guys that are one and done. And if there's either a college basketball season at all, or if it's like severely delayed, like will those guys even like go to college? Like I don't that's going to be that's another topic, I guess. But
I mean, and that's something, I did a story on that. Kenny Robinson from the XFL, he got dismissed from West Virginia as a sophomore, and instead of going to an NAIA school, he basically just decided to go to the XFL, got paid. And a lot of scouts have said that he's got an advantage that a lot of other prospects don't, because he's been in a professional environment. He's worked with NFL coaches, because all those guys in the XFL have worked in the NFL, and it's going to help him. And I'm wondering if a lot of guys decide, you know what, instead of just sitting out this year, do we go to the XFL in the spring? Because it's going to start on time probably in the spring if the NFL is up and running. And I think that's going to be an advantage for the XFL. It's going to bring a lot of eyes to it. And it's also probably going to help a lot of kids that would otherwise have to sit the year out.
Yeah, I mean, and another thing you think about is if there's not a college football season, like what does that mean for all those prospects? So is Trevor Lawrence eligible to leave, or are they going to force him to play another year away from the NFL? Like
no,
there's all these things.
He'd be eligible.
Yeah,
because it's 3 years after high school.
I mean, but then you're also removing a year for guys who could have proved themselves in their third year or fourth year or whatever. Also,
Trevor Lawrence isn't going to be affected by everything else.
Yeah, and so I wonder, that's going to be okay. Well, let's get into specific Eagle stuff now. So news wise, today actually the Pro Football Hall of Fame released an all-decade team, and the Eagles are pretty well represented. I imagine they were one of the most represented teams in the league. I'll go through who made it. Defensive tackle, Fletcher Cox. Left tackle, Jason Peters. Running back, LaShawn McCoy. And Darren Sproles made it as a gadget and a returner. I mean, all of those make complete sense and are not surprising in any way. It is cool that Darren Sproles got that much love in there, I would say. I think there's some people who are like up in arms that Jason Kelce didn't make it. I get that, but I don't think it necessarily that's as ludicrous as people are making it out to be. Was there anybody else you thought that should have been considered?
I mean, Jason Kelce was my biggest one. Jason Peters wasn't unanimous, and I think that's absolutely crazy. He and Joe Thomas were clearly the best two tackles of their generation. I don't know if it's even close. Only Thomas got the unanimous vote. Kelce, to me, here's my argument for Kelce. So Calais Campbell had never had more than 10 sacks in a season before 3 years ago. He'd never been a first-team All-Pro, and suddenly he's an all-decade performer. Like, if you're going to allow Calais Campbell to get in for the last 3 to 5 years, I don't think any center is even on the same stratosphere as Jason Kelce over the last 5 years. So, or the last 4 years, excuse me. So, like, that's what I'm kind of perplexed by. But, I mean, all this is novelty stuff. Anyway.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I mean, what I will say is this will help LaShawn McCoy get in the Hall of Fame if he is on the cusp. I think this helps Darren Sproles get in the Hall of Fame. Jason Peters is going to get in the Hall of Fame regardless of whether he was unanimous or not. Unanimousness. Fletcher Cox is the guy who's really interesting because I think if he makes the All-Pro team this year, I think he's got an outside shot at the Hall of Fame. But
he needs a few more like really good sack seasons, I think.
Yeah, I mean it's interesting because he's a defensive tackle and he's a better run defender than Aaron Donald, but Aaron Donald obviously is probably the best interior.
Puts up numbers,
ever. So it's interesting. I think Fletcher Cox has had a better career than Ndamukong Suh if I'm like really thinking about it, especially from a team success, a defensive line success, what he's able to do in both aspects. Like I think Ndamukong Suh is a better player probably or is more naturally talented, but Fletcher Cox to me, outside of Aaron Donald, is the second best defensive tackle of the last 10 years, and and he's only played 8 of those the last 10 years, so that says something. But
I should say I forgot to mention one important Eagles player actually that also got in, Frank Gore.
Oh yeah, got it, man.
Legendary Eagles running back Frank Gore.
Somebody said to me, somebody made that joke on Twitter. I'm like, you guys, this joke never gets old for you.
Oh yeah, that's a Twitter joke forever.
Yeah, to me,
like they're like older people in Philadelphia who don't have Twitter who don't know that that's a thing.
Yeah, it's weird, but they're listening to this podcast, so now they do.
Hey, oh yeah, they all are listening.
Yeah, all of them.
Was there anyone obvious non-Eagles wise that you thought was a big snub? I didn't see anyone flipping out about anybody else really.
I'll be honest, I didn't study the list outside.
Yeah, me either. I mean, I think the list looks pretty legit. I mean, I guess you could. I don't think Zach Ertz should have got in over Kelce. Maybe Ertz has one more. Oh, no, he hasn't really because Kelce won the Super Bowl. Because I think Kelce has the better numbers by a long shot.
Yeah, I mean, he's definitely a more yards after the catch guy. But I will say Ertz has led the Eagles in receptions, receiving yards, and touchdowns over the last 4 years. He's the only tight end in the league that's done that. So.
Yeah, I mean that's significant. He'd be in the top 3 or 4 if they win another person or two.
I do think it's ridiculous that they don't have a fullback in there, and also, Lane.
Yeah, you're a big fullback guy.
Well, no, I mean it's a position.
I know.
Hey, let's leave punter off of there. You know what I mean? It's like, to me, I just think that's silly. Especially
no long snapper either.
Well, especially when you have a position called like flex, which is basically a gadget position that Darren Sproles got. Like it seemed like an unnecessary honor to give somebody 2 honors in that and not have a fullback. That seems kind of ridiculous to me, but. I'll get off the hill that I'm standing on.
You're on the fullback hill. You and Kyle Shanahan. That's about it.
Hey, you know what? Good company.
That's the first time you've ever been grouped together with him, actually.
Yeah, it's true.
All right. another topic that's kind of just been lingering over the last couple of weeks because the guy keeps making it that way. Yannick Ngakoue has been posting Eagles pictures to his Instagram story just about every day, to my knowledge. I don't look every day. There are other people who are better Twitter sleuths about or Instagram sleuths about that. It's, I don't know how to describe his decision to do that. It seems like he's trolling a little bit, but beyond that, he has tweeted repeatedly how he just really doesn't like Jacksonville and how he wants to leave. Whether it happens now or a few months from now or at the trade deadline, it seems inevitable that he eventually leaves the Jaguars. But what's your feeling on the Eagles as a potential destination for that? I know Shil Kapadia from The Athletic proposed a bunch of trades in an article, and he had the Giants trading for him. I don't know if the Giants are going to give up that much draft capital right now, though.
Yeah, so I checked in on this a little bit. From what I'm told, they have not had formal trade talks yet because nobody's reaching the Jaguars' initial asking price, which, from what I understand, is more than a 2020 first round pick. And also remember, the Jaguars already have 2 first round picks, so it's not like they have to be in a rush to gain that first round pick either. To me, look, that's everybody knows I covered them. That's a patient organization. You can see it in them keeping Doug Marrone and Dave Codwell. They wait things out. Shad Khan is very, very patient, and the patience paid off with Jalen Ramsey. They got 2-1. Maybe the most ridiculous trade, I think, of the last couple of years outside of the DeAndre Hopkins, David Johnson trade. Is the fact, look, Jalen was worth 2-1s, but you didn't extend him, and now you're in this spot where you have basically a gun to your head.
The Rams are so screwed. Beyond that's not the only reason, but that trade does not help it.
Yeah, and they have no draft picks for the next 3 years.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. And they got rid of half their roster.
They have no money.
They cut Todd Gurley.
Yeah.
I know that it's their fault they overpaid him, but the fact that he didn't even get to the extension part of his contract is just mind blowing.
So. Anyway, you asked my feel. Here's why the Eagles probably will not trade for him. One, they only have 8 draft picks. They want to keep their draft picks. They want more, actually. And then you can turn to me and say, well, he's 25, so he fits the youth movement. Yeah, that's true. Look, he's a phenomenal talent. He thinks he's elite. I think he's just a cusp under that. I think the word elite gets thrown around a lot for a guy who's only had 1 10-plus sack season. That said, he is very consistent. He's had at least 8 sacks in each of his 4 seasons. He's 25, like I said. He's got a real good knack for forcing fumbles. I would argue he was the second best player at worst on that 2017 Jaguars team that went to the AFC Championship game. That said, I do question the maturity of constantly handling this on social media. I think he's killing his market by constantly throwing this out there that he wants out and pouting and doing all this other stuff. And I know Jan. I think he's a great guy. One of my favorite players I covered in Jacksonville. But I think from an optics standpoint, if you're a GM and you know he wants $20 million, if you're going to have to put up with the Stephon Diggs treatment from him, I don't know if that's the smartest move to make and invest in. So speaking on that the outlook that you have to understand, that people have to remember, is that you're trading premium picks to pay Yannick Ngakoue. You're not just acquiring his contract. You are going to have to pay him market-setting money, and that's the issue. So you're not asking, is Yannick Ngakoue worth a first-round pick? You're asking, is Yannick Ngakoue's contract demands and Yannick Ngakoue worth a first-round pick and then something else?
To jump on that, I imagine his contract will average $20 million a year based on what edge rushers get.
Maybe even more. And
depending on when he signs it, yeah.
And the thing is, according to Over the Cap, the Eagles are projected to be $25 million over the cap next year. So you can turn and you can say, yeah, but they're going to get rid of Deshaun Jackson and they're going to get rid of Malik Jackson and they probably will cut Alshon Jeffrey and then they'll do this and then they'll do that. And that
still won't cover it, yeah.
Well, what will cover it is them moving the cap over that they have right now that they've been very protective of. So that way it gives them more wiggle room. So once they cut all those big contracts, then they actually have, 20 to 30 million in cap space. That said, if you sign Yannick Ngakoue right now, you're probably down to like $6 or $7 million that you can roll over. That's not as helpful because on top of that, you're probably going to have now be 40 million over the cap. So you're killing yourself in both ways. You're making this a very difficult transition for you. So not only are you trading a first round pick and then maybe other assets, you're putting yourself in cap hell probably Ram style for the next couple of years, whether you cut a bunch of guys or not. You're also maybe going to have to decide whether you want Yannick Ngakoue or Fletcher Cox in a year or two. So to me, that doesn't make a ton of sense as much as they value the edge rushing and need that. On top of that, Yannick Ngakoue is not that great of a run defender. He can play the run. I think I don't want to dismiss him as a run defender, but Jim Schwartz is very run focused, and you first have to be able to stop the run in his defense. Like that's why he likes Brandon Graham. That's why he likes Derek Barnett. So you're adding those elements, and all of this stuff just doesn't add up to interest. And from what I understand, they haven't made a formal offer. So I don't know when that time will come. Maybe if after the draft his price tag and the Jaguars' price tags drop, then it's a smart move. Or maybe you draft in the first round. Let's say Jerry Jeudy falls to the to 21. You're able to get him, and so suddenly you feel really good about your wide receiver group. And then day 2, you have a whole day to figure out, hey, maybe we can make this work where we trade our second round pick and then next year's second round pick and a third round pick. You know, something like that. Maybe that's what you're telling yourself if you're Howie Roseman. But to me, I don't think it makes a lot of sense for the Eagles. No.
I think Eagles fans need to take a step back and accept that Howie Roseman just is not going to trade a first-round pick for a player. Like, that's just not what he's going to do.
Yeah, look, if you were to trade a first-round pick for Yannick Ngakoue and he was in the third year of his deal, sure, because then you have some leverage. But if you're...
Yeah, exactly. He has all the leverage if you do it this way.
Right, because you're trading a premium asset or multiple, and it just, to me, I don't see how any of this fits into philosophy other than the fact that he's 25 and good at his position. You know what I mean? Like from a cap standpoint and from a draft standpoint, I don't really think this makes any sense whatsoever. I don't even know if I'd be comfortable trading a second round pick for him because that contract is going to cause a lot of issues. You might have to decide between having Yannick Ngakoue on one side and then having Derek Barnett, Brandon Graham, Fletcher Cox, Malik Jack, like you might have to like throw out like the, you know, everything to have Yannick Ngakoue on this team moving forward, especially when with the contract they just gave Darius Slay and the contract that they just gave Javon Hargrave. I mean,
and honestly, like I know it's not an apples to apples comparison necessarily, but Jadeveon Clowney is still sitting on the free agency market, and you don't have to give up a draft pick for him. So if they were that desperate to upgrade their defensive end group, just pay $18 million to Jadeveon Clowney for 1 year or something.
Yeah, I mean, to me...
I wouldn't do that necessarily. I'm just saying, like, if that's the idea everybody has, like, you don't need to give up draft picks to go and get that guy.
You don't. And, you know, I don't think that's what they're going to end up doing, like you said. But to me, this is just one of those things where the fan base is really excited about this. But to me, I just don't really understand the logic of making this move. To me, it's not a very... It's not a Howie move. It's just not. Like Howie is very calculated. You can say what you want about the Golden Tate trade. You can say what you want about the Jeffrey trade, the Jeffrey re-signing, but those at least have some basis of reality of what he was trying to do. Because if Jeffrey plays really well last year, nobody's frowning about a fully guaranteed contract. Here, you know what's at stake. You know what's going to happen. Even if Ngakoue gets 15 sacks next year, you're still probably saying goodbye to like 2/3 of your defensive line depth. So, like that's the reality of the situation, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think that all makes sense. All right, I think we can move on from the Yannick talk. You mentioned the idea of like Jerry Jeudy falling to them, which I don't think either of us think would actually happen, but I mean, crazier things have happened, and I honestly think people are overlooking the prospect of one or two of these receivers falling further than expected, because I think teams are kind of going into this draft knowing that it's a deep wide receiver class and maybe you don't need to pick a guy super early at the position, especially with like the offense. There's those 4 offensive tackles I think are going to go pretty early, and then you have the obvious like elite prospects. So it's going to be very interesting to see how it works. But do you see like what do you think needs to happen for the Eagles to seriously consider trading up? And what do you think needs to happen for them to consider trading back? And what do you think needs to happen for them to stay at 21?
So as far as trading up, I think it's going to have to be like an Andre Dillard situation where like maybe he falls to maybe Ruggs or Judy falls to 18,
Yeah,
and then they trade a 4th round pick and maybe next year's 4th or next year's 3rd. I think they'd be open to that. Trading a 2nd round pick to get up to 12 or 13 just does not make a lot of sense based on their outlook this year. They have a lot of needs. A lot of focus has been on wide receiver, but they still objectively have holes at safety and corner. They need a starting linebacker. They need defensive end and offensive line depth. Like, there's a lot to handle here. And, Howie Roseman's brought it up several times this offseason. They've only had 10 draft picks over the past 2 offseasons. So their success has been measured by really a small grouping of players. And a lot of those players haven't worked out, so they want to expand the value and talent of their hauls. And I think they're more likely to trade back. Now, here's what needs to happen for them to trade back. I think all of the top 3 edge rushers in the class have to be off the board. I think all 3 of the major corners have to be off the board. And I think all 3 of the major wide receivers have to be off the board. I think that will happen. I think Fulton and CJ Henderson and Okudah will be off the board. I think Judy, Lamb, and Ruggs will be off the board. I think Caleb on Chason, Chase Young, they'll both be off the board. And so you look at it, you look at Tennessee at 29, you look at the Ravens at 28, even if you look at the Saints a couple of picks later, the wide receiver group to me is very close depending on your preference once you get past the top 3. So you're looking at Baylor's Denzel Mims, you're looking at LSU's Justin Jefferson, you're looking at TCU's Jalen Reagor. And I think they can trade back and land one of those 3 guys in the late 20s and pick up either a 3rd round pick or, a 4th and a 5th, or maybe even a 2nd, depending on if they're willing to swap a 4th in that deal as well. So
yeah, I think if like Jordan Love is still around there, he's a guy that I think would be someone that a team would trade a little more to go and get if they like, even if it's the Patriots moving up 2 spots or something like that.
Well, and that's the thing. So the Patriots are at 23. If you're a team like the Colts who really needs a quarterback of the future, or even the Titans who have
or Green Bay.
Yeah, I mean, any of those 3 teams who have starters in place, but long term, the projection is that you're going to probably need a quarterback of the future. Maybe you trade up. I don't see the Eagles trading back into the 2nd round, so I think the Colts could probably be ruled out. But
yeah, it's a little different than when they were number 32 a couple years ago.
Right, but if you're the Packers and you really like Jordan Love, I could see the Eagles being willing to trade back later into the 1st and, see what's what. I mean, look, them getting a 2nd round pick for trading back 8 spots would be phenomenal for them, because that way, maybe they draft a safety there and then you draft 2 wide receivers back to back in the 2nd round. So, I mean, I think that makes a lot more sense than trading up. I think trading up in a draft, as much as people have said, don't Donnell Pumphrey this, I think this class is good enough to where the first 9 guys are going to all be able to, 9 to probably 11 guys will be able to start right away.
I mean, especially on this team.
Oh, for sure.
But I mean, one thing because they're going to pick a receiver early, whether that's the first one in the first round or the first and the second. I'm curious if they double up in the first 3 rounds or not, because that'd be an interesting move.
I do think they'll go wide receiver I think they'll double dip in the first 4 rounds for sure. It will be interesting to see if they kind of double dip in the 1st and 2nd round, kind of like they did at corner with Lito Shepherd and Sheldon Brown. I think that could be really interesting.
Yeah. Do you think they would consider an edge rusher there? Like you mentioned, Chai San and Chase Young obviously being gone, but what if they're like really, if they really like Yetur Gross Matos or something, because he's a great athlete and the kind of like developmental guy they could really do wonders with.
Yeah, he's interesting to me. I could see them doing it. It would go with their philosophies. But if you're doing that, you're definitely turning down the 5th-year contract option for Derek Barnett. And I've been told both publicly and privately that the Eagles really like their defensive end group more than anyone else. But that said, they also like their wide receiver group more than anybody else. They like their linebacker group more than anybody else. So, yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I wouldn't rule out, I mean, Matos would be a very interesting pick, I think, from a standpoint of, okay, do you feel like he can rush from the weak side? Do you think that he is a guy that could eventually take over for not only Barnett, but for Brandon Graham and be that top edge rusher? I think that's more of the question. I haven't gotten the sense that a lot of teams think he's a fully developed player, but if you're taking a developmental first round pick, they've been favorable to Penn State as of late. So maybe it's just they were waiting on their chance to get him, and they've kind of tricked everybody and kept their plans under wraps, thinking that they're going to draft a wide receiver. I mean, I think if they get to the second round, they could draft somebody like Brandon Ayuk from ASU, and that would be the speed demon that everybody likes. I'm not as big on Hamler as everybody else, but Hamler will probably be available at 53 as well.
I mean, there's been some really good receivers that have been picked in the second round, even just the last few years. Like you can, especially in a class like this, I don't think it's outlandish that if there's a guy on the board at 21 or if they trade back that they just like value really highly and he doesn't play receiver, like it would not shock me at all. Even if it's them drafting, like if they trade back and Cesar Aziz is there and they're obsessed with him as a potential Jason Kelsey replacement in a year, like these are the type of moves the Eagles have always made.
Yeah, I mean,
drafting a center in the first round would not be a thing to excite the fan base, but like, I don't know if they grade that guy as an all-pro guy for 10 years, like that's the kind of guy they would draft.
Yeah, I recently had a 7-round mock draft, and I had them selecting Matt Hennessy from Temple in the second round, and I got a lot of positive and negative feedback about that. I think it'd be a very polarizing topic. But most of the guys that are going to be selected early on in this draft that play center can also play both guard spots. And
I think Cushionberry too from LSU.
I think the dynamic of challenging Isaac Seumalo, who's on a lower end starting contract, and then also having an heir apparent to Jason Kelsey is really important. And with that said, too, they don't have a lot of experience at offensive tackle. We talked about it the last podcast. Like, if Matt Pryor's your swing tackle, he's never really started a game at either tackle spot. He hasn't really played much at either tackle spot. And an important game, Jordan Mailata's never played an actual game of football like a meaningful game of football in his entire life. So I wouldn't be surprised if they took a guy like Sadiq Charles in the second round from LSU or something like that. I had them waiting until the 7th round to take an offensive tackle, but you need a guy who actually understands the left tackle position, who has experience at the college level for at least, and can play that position maybe sooner than Mailata to challenge him. So, look, they've got some issues at offensive line and defensive line that I think need to be addressed in this draft. And they've set themselves up to where they can handle both of those needs.
Yeah, I think that all makes sense. Was there anything else draft-wise you wanted to cover before we head out?
Yeah. Let's talk about Justin Jefferson really quick, because there's this narrative that he is only a slot wide receiver. So a couple of things there. I actually think he projects very well to the Z spot, the spot that Deshaun Jackson plays. This is probably going to be Deshaun Jackson's last year in Philadelphia. And even if it's not, he's coming off a 3-game season and an injury that sidelined him for a pretty long time. He should be fine. The core muscle surgery is something the guys recover from pretty well. But, he is 33 years old. They need to prepare for life without him. And, they might keep Alshon Jeffrey at this point, but at the X position, but they drafted J.J. Arcega-Whiteside, who they've made clear that they still believe in, and he's supposedly their X of the future. So you need a Z and an X for the future, and that's why I think Justin Jefferson on the outside in 12 personnel, when you have 2 tight ends on the field, when you have Goddard and Ertz on the field, makes sense. Not to get too X's and O's, but when you're in 11 personnel with just 1 tight end, you can move Jefferson into the slot, similar to Keenan Allen. The slot is a big role. I think a lot of people view the slot as like the third wide receiver because in Madden, the third wide receiver always plays the slot. But guys like Keenan Allen, guys like Chris Godwin, guys like Devontae Adams, they put up massive numbers and they are very important to an offense. I've seen a lot of people say that Jefferson isn't a scheme fit, but that doesn't make any sense because Carson Wentz targets the middle of the field with Zach Ertz like all the time. And I think Jefferson wouldn't be redundant to Ertz. I actually think he'd free up Ertz to have mismatches on the outside. Ertz sometimes likes to go up against cornerbacks because there's a size difference. I think that Jefferson makes a ton of sense for the Eagles. I'd understand if they went Denzel Mims or if they traded back, but I do think Jefferson is a much better fit than I've seen people talk about on Twitter. He's more than a slot wide receiver, in my opinion, and I think he can get the job done on the outside as that flanker wide receiver that Deshaun Jackson is. He's not the speed threat that Deshaun is, but he can definitely get open. He's very good about creating space. He's got really trusty hands. The problem last year was not just speed. It was getting separation and catching the ball. And those are two things that he does extremely well. So I think he would make a lot of sense for the Eagles. I've been asked a lot about Jefferson, and I just kind of wanted to go on a rant there.
Yeah, he feels like every year there's like a guy or two that's like the consensus. Either I hope the Eagles get him or it seems like they're going to get him. And he's been the most popular projection, I think, from looking at mock drafts and what people are talking about.
Yeah, for sure. And for good reason. I think he's a guy that definitely makes their offense better. I think something to consider is, this could be the last year for Jeffrey and Deshaun Jackson. Yes, Greg Ward played well in the slot, but you don't really know what he is after 6 games. That's just not a thing. So you could realistically be looking for a new X wide receiver, a new Z wide receiver for the future, and then a new slot receiver. And Jefferson handles 2 of those positions pretty well. Another guy I like, ironically, is Von Jefferson, who I think would be a really good challenge for J.J. Arcega-Whiteside. At the X position, I actually think he'd beat him out. He's probably one of the best route runners in this class. He's the son of the Jets wide receivers coach, who was also a former NFL wide receiver. Very smart kid, a lot quicker than he looks on film. Just a smart guy. And so I think the Eagles are in a spot where they could really upgrade the wide receiver position with a double dip in the draft. And the Jefferson brothers, or as I call them, the moving on up crew, would fit in well in Philadelphia.
I like it. All right. I think we can wrap up on that note. Thank you guys for listening. I hope everybody's staying safe out there. Keep writing us reviews, sending Mike text messages on Eagles Extra. Sign up if you haven't.
2 weeks free.
2 weeks free. Leave us some comments on YouTube, and we'll talk to you guys soon.